Julian Vance existed in a world of polished glass and silent, automated obedience. His penthouse office, occupying the entire top floor of the Vance Industries Tower, was less a workspace and more a monument to sterile success. The city sprawled beneath him, a muted tapestry of lights and motion, but he rarely saw it. He saw stock tickers, market projections, and the faint ghostly reflection of a man in $1,000 suit who had forgotten the feeling of sunshine on his skin. Loneliness was a currency he had accrued right alongside his billions, a silent partner in every acquisition. His routine was a merciless metronome of efficiency. 5 a.m. workout, 6 a.m. global market review, 7 a.m. arrival at the office. Today, the rhythm shattered. A frantic call from security pulled him from a quarterly report. He descended in his private elevator, a scowl etched onto his face. The pristine white marble of the lobby was marred by a dark, spreading stain of coffee. A janitor was on his knees, blotting the mess with frantic inefficiency, while a small girl with enormous, solemn eyes stood beside the cart, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry," the building manager stammered, wringing his hands. "It was an accident. We're handling it." Julian's gaze was cold steel. He looked at the janitor, a tall, broad-shouldered black man whose movements were deliberate and weary. He then looked at the little girl, who flinched almost imperceptibly under his stare. An irrational spike of irritation shot through him. This was his building, his sanctuary of order, and it was being soiled by clumsiness and a child. "Just clean it up," Julian said, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. He turned, not waiting for a response, the disruption already fading into the calculated hum of his day. But as the elevator doors slid shut, he couldn't shake the image of the little girl's eyes, not scared, but profoundly, unnervingly sad. The image lingered, an unwelcome watermark on his spreadsheets. The next day, driven by an impulse he couldn't name, Julian found himself looking out his vast window, not at the financial district, but at the small, manicured park across the street. And there they were. The janitor, Marcus, he'd learned his name was, sat on a bench, patiently unwrapping a sandwich. The little girl, Lily, sat beside him, not eating, just watching the pigeons with that same heart-wrenching stillness. For 3 days, Julian watched this silent ritual. On the 4th, he broke another of his own rules. He left the tower at midday. He walked across the street, the unfamiliar noise of traffic and city life feeling alien against his ears. He approached the bench, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. Marcus looked up, his expression guarded but polite. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "I never got your name," Julian said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. He wasn't used to initiating conversations that didn't involve a contract. "It's Marcus Thorne, and this is my daughter Lily." He gestured to the girl, who looked at Julian and then quickly buried her face in her father's side. "She's quiet," Julian observed, stating the obvious. A shadow passed over Marcus's face, a fleeting glimpse of a pain so deep it seemed to have settled into his bones. "Yes, sir, she is." He offered no further explanation. Julian stood there, a titan of industry feeling utterly powerless. He should leave. He had a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Instead, he found himself sitting on the other end of the bench. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the distant city hum and the cooing of the pigeons Lily was watching so intently. It was the most peaceful moment Julian had experienced in a decade. He didn't understand it, and that bothered him more than anything. He was a man who understood everything, who could quantify and conquer any variable. But the quiet dignity of this man and the profound silence of his child were equations he couldn't begin to solve. "She likes the birds," Julian said softly. Marcus nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "She likes things that can fly away." Their encounters became a fragile routine. Julian would find excuses to be in the lobby when Marcus's shift ended, or he would accidentally be in the park during their lunch. He learned that Marcus was a single father, that Lily's mother had passed away a few years ago. He learned that Marcus worked the night shift so he could have every day with his daughter. One afternoon, as Julian watched Lily meticulously arrange a line of fallen leaves, he finally asked the question that had been hovering in his mind. "Forgive me if this is too personal, but a man like you, You seem capable of more than this." He gestured vaguely at the janitor's uniform. Marcus didn't take offense. He looked at Lily, his gaze softening with a love so potent it was almost tangible. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Mr. Vance," he said simply. "This job, it's quiet. It's steady. There are no surprises. After everything else, Lily needs that. She needs no surprises." "After what?" Julian pressed gently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter. "Before Lily was born, I had a different life, a different plan." He unconsciously rubbed his left forearm, a gesture Julian had seen him make before. "I was in the army, a medic, saw things, did things. When I got out, her mother and we were going to open a little workshop. I've always been good with my hands, but then she got sick. And after she was gone," he trailed off, the words catching in his throat. "Lily just stopped talking. The doctor said it was trauma, that she needed a world that was safe and predictable. So that's what I built for her." He looked at Julian, his eyes clear and direct, holding no shame, only a fierce, protective resolve. "This job gives her that. It lets me be the father she needs." Julian felt a profound sense of shame. He had judged this man based on his uniform, on a spilled cup of coffee. He had built an empire of cold, hard assets, but Marcus had built a world for his daughter, out of sacrifice and quiet, unyielding love. For the first time, Julian Vance felt poor. The reveal of Marcus's past wasn't a grand secret, but a quiet, powerful testament to a strength Julian had never known. The park bench conversations deepened into a tentative friendship. Julian, a man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, found himself asking Marcus for advice on the most mundane things, simply to hear his calm, measured perspective. One rainy Tuesday, Julian invited them up to his office to wait out a sudden downpour. Lily's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling city below, her small hand pressing against the cool glass. Marcus looked around, not with awe, but with a quiet curiosity. His gaze landed on an object on a pedestal in the corner of the room, an intricate 19th century brass astrolabe, a marvel of gears and rings. It was also broken. A hairline crack ran through the main ecliptic ring, and the gears were frozen. "I bought it at an auction years ago," Julian explained, walking over to it. "Paid a fortune. The restoration experts said it was a lost cause. The mechanism is too delicate, the parts irreplaceable. It was a symbol of his own life, he often thought. Gleaming on the outside, fundamentally broken within." Marcus moved closer, his big, capable hands hovering over the device without touching it. "There's no such thing as a lost cause," he said softly. "Just things people give up on too easily." He peered at the gears. "The tension is just seized up. And this ring, it could be brazed, if you go slow." An idea, reckless and completely out of character, sparked in Julian's mind. Would you be willing to look at it, after your shift perhaps?" And so, a new routine was born. Several nights a week, after the Vance Industries tower had emptied out, Marcus and Lily would come up to the penthouse. While Lily sat at Julian's massive desk, drawing fantastical worlds on expensive stationery, with a set of colored pencils Julian had bought for her, Marcus would work on the astrolabe. He brought a small toolkit, his movements patient and precise. For Julian, these hours became the anchor of his week. He would sit, watching Marcus work, the soft clicks and whirs of the tools, a soothing balm to his usually chaotic mind. He saw the same focus in Marcus's hands that he saw in his love for Lily, an unwavering, gentle determination. The vast, cold office was transformed by their presence, filled with a warmth it had never known. It was no longer just his space. It was theirs. One night, as Marcus delicately cleaned a tiny gear, Julian found himself speaking of things he had locked away for a decade. "The reason I don't trust anyone," he began, his voice low, "is because I did once. Completely." Marcus paused his work, giving Julian his full attention. "My first company. I built it from my college dorm room with my best friend Garrett Shaw. We were brothers, my fiancée at the time. She handled the marketing. We were on the verge of a massive breakthrough, and then they were gone. Both of them." Julian's voice was flat, stripped of emotion by the passage of time. "They took my code, my investors, my company, They sold it out from under me and started their own firm with the profits. Garrett married her 6 months later. I learned that day that loyalty is a liability and love is a transaction. He had never told anyone the full story. He had simply rebuilt, bigger and more ruthless than before, encasing his heart in layers of impenetrable success. Marcus listened, his expression one of deep empathy. "Not all love is a transaction, Mr. Vance," he said quietly, "and real loyalty isn't a liability. It's the only thing that holds the world together." As if on cue, Julian's phone buzzed with an alert from his legal team. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Shawcrest Capital. Garrett Shaw. The alert was a preliminary filing, a hostile takeover attempt of Vance Industries. The ghost from his past had returned, no longer content with the first company he had stolen, now coming for the empire Julian had built in its wake. The battle he had been running from for 10 years had finally found him. Garrett Shaw had always been a predator, and he smelled blood in the water. He hadn't expected Julian to have a weakness, but a few days of discreet surveillance gave him exactly what he needed. He saw Julian, the untouchable titan, sitting on a park bench with a janitor and a silent little girl. He saw the easy companionship, the shared laughter. He saw a crack in the armor. The first blow came during a preliminary meeting with some of Vance Industries' key investors. Garrett, oozing a confident charm that Julian knew masked a core of pure venom, presented his case for new leadership. He spoke of Julian's waning focus and eccentric new priorities. Then he delivered the killing blow. "I'm sure Julian is a great philanthropist," Garrett said, a smug smile playing on his lips. "I've even seen him myself, taking a personal interest in the custodial staff. A noble gesture, of course, but one has to wonder, when your CEO is more focused on the welfare of a janitor than the value of your stock, is his head still in the game?" The remark, seemingly off the cuff, was a perfectly aimed poison dart. It landed exactly as intended. Whispers started. Julian's mystique of untouchable focus began to crumble. The board members, men who thought in spreadsheets and bottom lines, grew nervous. Julian's association with Marcus and Lily was no longer a private solace. It was a public liability, a weapon being turned against him by the very man who had taught him to be ruthless. The warmth he had just begun to let into his life was now threatening to burn his entire world down. The whispers became a roar. The stock price for Vance Industries, a symbol of stability for years, began to tremble and dip. Garrett's narrative was working. Julian was portrayed as an unraveling eccentric, a man losing his golden touch. The board of directors called an emergency closed-door meeting. The mood was grim. "Julian, we've backed you for 15 years, said one of the oldest members, a man named Henderson. "But the optics on this are a disaster. Shaw is painting you as unstable." "Garrett Shaw is a thief," Julian stated, his voice a low growl. "Maybe so," another board member chimed in. "But right now, he looks like a savvy businessman, and you look distracted. This janitor, this relationship, it's unseemly. It projects weakness." The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Weakness. It was the one thing Julian had sworn he would never be again. Henderson leaned forward, his expression pained but resolute. "We need you to win this fight, Julian, and to do that, you need to be the man you were a year ago. Focused, isolated, untouchable. We are asking you, for the good of this company, to distance yourself from this man and his child, at least until the threat from Shaw is neutralized. Cut ties, make a statement, show them you're still the killer we invested in." Julian felt a cold fury rise within him, but it was followed by a wave of crushing despair. They were asking him to do the unthinkable, to treat Marcus and Lily as disposable, as collateral damage in a corporate war. They were asking him to become Garrett Shaw, to defeat Garrett Shaw. He looked at the faces around the table, faces of men he had made rich, men who now demanded he sacrifice the only genuine human connection he had found in a decade to protect their portfolios. He was at a precipice, forced to choose between the empire he had built and the fragile, beautiful warmth of a world he was just beginning to know. The final board meeting was staged like a public execution. Garrett Shaw, flanked by his lawyers, stood before the shareholders and board of Vance Industries, delivering a masterful, brutal presentation. He laid out a vision for the company that was lean, profitable, and utterly soulless. The climax of his speech was a single slide, a candid photo of Julian laughing with Marcus and Lily in the park. "This is your CEO," Garrett announced, his voice ringing with theatrical pity. "A man who has clearly lost his priorities. While your portfolios have been shrinking, he's been spending his time playing surrogate father to the help. This company doesn't need a philanthropist. It needs a leader. It's time to choose." A tense silence filled the auditorium. All eyes turned to Julian. He walked slowly to the podium, his face calm and unreadable. He looked at the board, at the investors, and then his eyes found Garrett. "Mr. Shaw is right about one thing," Julian began, his voice steady and clear. "It is time to choose. He's also right that I have been spending time with Marcus Thorne and his daughter. I've learned more about value from them in the last few months than I have in 15 years of market analysis." A murmur went through the crowd. Garrett smirked. "Garrett sees a janitor," Julian continued, his voice rising with a power no one had heard from him in years. "Because that's all he is capable of seeing. He looks at a man's uniform and makes his judgment. I, however, have learned to look at the man himself." He turned. "Marcus, would you come up here?" A door at the side of the stage opened, and Marcus walked out, dressed not in his janitor's uniform, but in a simple, dignified suit Julian had insisted on. He stood beside Julian, his presence solid and unwavering. "Mr. Shaw derides this man's profession," Julian said. "So let me tell you about his previous one. Marcus, would you mind?" He nodded toward Marcus's left sleeve. With quiet composure, Marcus rolled up his sleeve. On his powerful forearm was a tattoo. It was the insignia of the 68W combat medic, the coiled serpent and staff. But beneath it was a small, distinct cross, a mark that was not standard issue. It was the symbol for a Silver Star commendation. 8 years ago, Julian announced, his voice resonating with cold fury. Platoon 2-5 of the 101st Airborne was hit by a daisy-chain IED in Kandahar. Their medic, despite being wounded himself, shielded 3 of his men from the second blast, and then spent the next 9 hours under enemy fire, keeping 12 wounded soldiers alive until medevac could arrive. That medic was Sergeant Marcus Thorne. The Vance Foundation, this company's foundation, held a gala to honor his platoon's heroism. I was too busy in a board meeting to attend. A wave of shock and shame rippled through the audience. Garrett's face had gone pale. "This man," Julian said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder, "is a hero who sacrificed everything for others. He took a quiet job to build a safe world for his daughter after an unspeakable loss. He is the embodiment of integrity, loyalty, and strength. Values this company used to stand for. Values Mr. Shaw knows nothing about." Julian then turned his attention fully to Garrett, his eyes blazing. "And while we're on the subject of character, let's talk about the fraudulent origins of Shawcrest Capital." For the next 5 minutes, Julian calmly and methodically detailed, with documented proof projected on the screen behind him, the theft of his original company, the wire fraud, the patent infringement. He laid Garrett Shaw's entire career bare as a house of cards built on a single foundational crime. The auditorium was a tomb of stunned silence. Garrett Shaw stood frozen, his smug facade shattered, exposed as a common thief in a $1,000 suit. Security guards moved toward him, their expressions grim. His career wasn't just over. It was incinerated. Julian ignored the chaos erupting around him. He turned to the board. "I am not the man I was a year ago, thank God. If you want a leader who values stock prices over people, who sees men like Marcus Thorne as disposable, then accept my resignation. But if you want a leader who will rebuild this company on a foundation of integrity, then I will stay." Henderson, the old board member, rose to his feet, his eyes shining. He began to clap. Slowly, then all at once, the entire room joined him, a thunderous ovation that wasn't for the billionaire CEO, but for the man he had chosen to become. Later, after the press had been placated and the lawyers had descended, Julian found Marcus and Lily waiting for him in the quiet hallway outside the boardroom. The noise and the fury of the day faded away. There was only the calm, steady presence of the man who had, without trying, saved him. "I can't thank you enough, Marcus," Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Marcus simply nodded. "You did the right thing, Julian. That's all." Julian knelt down so he was eye level with Lily. She had watched the entire proceeding with her wide, knowing eyes. She looked from her father to Julian, then took a small, hesitant step forward. She reached out a tiny hand and laid it gently against Julian's cheek. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the simple, profound gesture. "Julian," she said, the words soft and perfectly formed. Julian's eyes snapped open. He stared at her, then at Marcus, whose own eyes were filled with tears. It was the first word she had spoken in 3 years. His name, a new beginning, spoken into the quiet aftermath of a war he had finally won by choosing not to fight with the enemy's weapons. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, but the room was unrecognizable. The cold chrome and glass had been softened by warm wood accents and comfortable chairs. A collection of vibrant, imaginative drawings was framed and hung proudly on one wall. On Julian's desk, the 19th century brass astrolabe gleamed, its gears and rings perfectly aligned, ticking with a soft, steady rhythm. Julian wasn't behind the desk. He was on the floor with Lily, helping her build a tower of blocks that defied gravity. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching them, a gentle smile on his face. He was no longer a janitor. He was now the executive director of the new Vance Veteran Integration Program, a well-funded initiative Julian had created to provide meaningful, high-level career opportunities for former service members. The three of them left the tower together, not as a CEO and his associates, but as a family walking into the afternoon sun. Their laughter echoed in the open air of the park, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. Julian had learned that the true measure of a man's wealth isn't found in the silent, sterile accumulation of assets, but in the rich, vibrant, and sometimes messy connections that make a life worth living. True value wasn't a number on a screen. It was the feeling of a small hand tucked